Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Our mission is to disrupt traditional leadership development by fostering a community of resilient, growth-minded individuals who drive their own destinies and lead effectively through change without sacrificing their well-being. Two former colleagues and current friends, Allison Allen and Dean Martin, invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired, where we lead with integrity and in a way that is authentic to ourselves and our purpose. The mission of this podcast is to disrupt traditional leadership development by fostering a community of resilient, growth-minded individuals who drive their own destinies and lead effectively through change without sacrificing their well-being. So today we are having a look at change. There are like all these different titles we could use, strategies for effective change management. I was thinking, Allison, there's that Stevie Wonder song called Love's in Need of Love Today. I wanted to call this Change is in Need of Change Today, basically because I'm about to go on a massive rant that says, I'm so tired of hearing about change management. I'm fairly good natured mostly, but this is when I'm like, oh, bloody hell, I'm so tired of change. What is this all about?
I know.
So, what do you think about change management? What is this? Why are we doing this today?
I remember, God, I don't want to date myself. I would say probably about 15 years ago when change management was these big, gigantic spreadsheets, and we only associated it to tech changes.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden it became, the human side of change. And I agree with you. It's a constant. It is a constant conversation, a constant thing. But I think it has to be. I don't know that it always needs to be the same in terms of how we help people, leaders build skills. But it's constant, right? And it's something that we just have to, as humans, get used to, somehow be self-aware and do something about it. So I hear you and I agree with you, and I can be over it too, but I think it's one of those core competencies that you've heard me talk about that leaders need to get and get right. So they can get their employees to understand, so they can get back to work, which you've heard me say all the time. So,
and it's even in our mission statement, like strategies for effectively leading through change. So leaders who are part of this conversation now, let's think about what's a fresh way. How do we rewire this? What's a different or new way of considering how you do that with your people, help them get back to work in a way that doesn't sacrifice your well-being, in a way that allows you still to be resilient and enjoy what you're doing and, be within a community of others who are also
Why are you so over it? What's going on for you? What's happening?
Thank you for asking. I think what exhausts me, or where I'm getting that reaction from when I think about change management, is that it triggers my sense of this changes or new ways of working or a new project or whatever's happening within the organization doesn't have to make you feel like a victim. That is your choice. And sometimes this change management story, for me, maybe not others, lands as this is so hard. Look at what the organization's done. They've done a layoff. Now, what does it mean for me? Oh, they've introduced a new product. What does it mean for me? Oh, they've shifted our operating model around X. And it's a helpless state. And I'm like, no, drive your own destiny. Take charge. What can you do within this? And I think change still can be dressed up in this, let's help all these poor little people who are just subjected to the horrors of corporate. But it doesn't have to be that bad. It's just leading. It's okay.
It's so interesting. This isn't a normal take on change for you. So I don't want to dive into what might be going on, but it isn't your normal sort of reaction to change. And what's interesting about what you're saying is it's kind of getting people's emotions and their reactions to change is getting lumped into how do you execute change.
Yes.
And I think I would say let's be intentional about separating the two. Some change, as you know, right, is pretty devastating, right? I don't know how many times I've seen people cry over a product change. They may have lost the battle of something that they wanted. I've never seen that. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never seen it.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is something grave about, losing half of a team,
For sure,
or no longer working with people, or being fired, or being, and I do think there is, and we're not talking about it today because we're talking about it from the lens of leaders, but I do think that there's something about how do you get yourself back in control if something like that happens to you, and that may cause emotion.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to talk you down off of where you are right now, because I get it. Because it's like, God, when you're coaching people and they're like, but it's change, and it's like, okay, let me get you back to basics, which is, you now know this. You now know this thing has happened.
Yes.
And my go-to, what's in your control, what can you influence, and what do you have no choices around? So like if you get back to those basics to get yourself back in control, because that's all we want, right? When we're in status quo, just living our best lives, doing all the things, and then somebody comes and like knocks you like fuck on your back, right? You're sitting there and disrupted, and you're trying to figure out like, what do I do?
Yeah.
It's okay to be there for like a short period of time.
Correct.
But then the people who are like in charge and in control, or have more aspirations for themselves, figure out a way to get themselves back in control, and they climb themselves out of disruption, right? And that's all we want. But I don't want to try to talk you out of your feelings today on this one, but I do want to just acknowledge that sometimes it is emotional.
Sure. And I think also, I'm thinking of, there's this, a British psychoanalyst and also a pediatrician, a guy called Donald Winnicott. And I love all things psychoanalysis and psychotherapy related. But there's one of his quotes that says something like, tell me what you fear and I'll tell you what happened to you. And so I think in a way, this conversation, thank you, ever so therapeutic, is to also see like what has happened to me in terms of change. And why might even this topic, or having, reflecting on how I've helped teams move through change, much of that again comes back to my own personal psychology and my own experience of what has happened to me, and therefore why am I so keyed in to this notion of people feeling helpless within change. Yeah. Because I personally have felt helpless during times of change. And I'll even speak personally, and this will come in, we'll get back to talking about organizations and leaders. But I'm a gay transgender man, and came out probably in the last maybe 5-6 years or so. And much of my own psychotherapy and my reflection, my own, what I'd call my inner work, has been around what was I aware of when I was younger, having been assigned female at birth, but trying to move through the world, making sense of who I am. And when were there moments, so much of it, my childhood or my 20s or 30s or 40s, I felt that there was nothing that I could do. And so I'm reacting to this state, to this feeling of powerlessness that I remember. And then finally getting to a point of, well, it's just me. Who am I waiting for? Am I waiting for a sign from someone else to give me permission to become who I am? If I continue to wait for that sign, I'll be here a very long time. So being able to move into a position of, okay, I'll take ownership of this. I think some of the things that are certainly true of what I've experienced in terms of my own legal or physical and emotional transition still relates to what people need to be able to understand or get to a decision around within organizations, which is something's happened to me. what's actually changing? Why is it changing? And what will it require of me? And if we can get to that position for ourselves, then we're able to move. But until such point, I wasn't able to, in terms of my own sort of transgender transition, but you're not going to be able to get your teams to be able to do that in terms of here's our new product, or we're operating differently around, these geographies, or this is how the layoffs happened, if they haven't yet been able to really understand how it impacts them personally.
Let me stay there. Let's just stay here for a second.
Sure.
First of all, I will never know, one, your childhood history, two, what your journey has been on this journey to becoming who you are, and who you've always been, but who you truly are, right? And yet, and I've spent time with you, and we've, we started our mid-career together. Like, I will never know. But let's just say you report to me, and I am driving a big change that impacts you.
Yeah.
Let's say layoff.
Yeah.
Right? There's something about understanding the human-centeredness, period. Even though I don't know all the things you've been through, there's something around leading change from a human-centric place that allows you to execute change that feels human. And then, to your point, give people the space to work through it. Because I'll never know. I will never know. Most leaders will never know. I mean, even if you tell them, they still don't know. It's almost like, I hope this is okay to say, but it's like when I was pregnant with both of my children, everybody told me what it was going to be like to deliver my babies. They told me, right? And when my first child, I'm like, they're telling me, and I'm like, but I don't know. Like, I don't know what that experience is going to be. They're describing it, and you're going to feel this, and this is going to happen. Literally, I get to the hospital. I don't even have a contraction. Like, they do a couple of things. I fall asleep, and they wake like 10 hours later. The doctor's like, Miss Allen, do you want to have this baby? Like, literally, that's what happened to me. I woke up, I pushed her out. It was all good, And so my point in saying this is that you never know the history of people's lives, and you never know, even if you describe to me your experience, and I hope that analogy was okay to use, I'm never going to still know, that. But however, if I'm driving change and you're on my team, if I'm leading from this space of humans, human-centric, then I can make space for you, and I can make space for how you feel, and I can make space for the execution that leaves people hopefully feeling whole and not cut up into little pieces as a result of something that I'm doing. Does that make sense?
No, beautiful.
And was that analogy okay to use, Dean?
For
like,
sure.
I hope that's okay, because I want to be super respectful. You know how much I love you, and I don't want to use things that don't make sense. And if so, you need to call me out. But I do think it's this notion of like, you'll never know what people's experiences are.
No.
You never will know.
Yeah.
But all you can do is have empathy for all the things that humans may be going through, and center the change into human-centric change.
And what I'm hearing you talk about in terms of giving birth is that as much as somebody could tell you, you also have to experience it. So in a way, like, sure, maybe that was helpful or not. You still had your own response and reaction and experience. So our lesson from that, the application from that is, as a leader, is to acknowledge that no matter what we think will happen with the layoff, with the new product we've launched, with the beautiful, great news about a new leader that's been appointed. Whatever that change is, we do not know how personally that will be received by our people. Could be the greatest news 100%. On earth. Finally, we've been acquired, and this is the great news because of this. And there are people who are freaking out, or are nervous, or scared, or upset, or delighted, or whatever.
Worried. And you're perplexed because again, you remember most leaders are grappling or have dealt with the change, and they're at a completely different point
Right.
of their acceptance or their embracing of the
Right.
change than a person who's just hearing it.
Right. Okay.
Right. The only thing I've always been like, I felt like, again, COVID landed on us. All the sort of crazy death landed on everybody at the same time. It wasn't any sort of, oh, you get to know about this before everybody else did. We were all kind of going through it at the same time. So it was interesting to watch teams in those moments because everybody was having different reactions. Whereas planned change, you as a leader, if you've been brought in early or in the middle, you've dealt with it.
Right.
So when you roll it out to somebody for the first time, they have not. For them, it's new leader. What do you mean new leader? I've when I was exited from an organization, right? Like asked to leave, my team didn't have plans for that. I didn't have time. I didn't have time to figure out what I'm doing, but I'm just like, okay, fine. This is what's happening to me. Right. So sometimes there's plan change and sometimes there's not. And so you as a leader, what are you going to do? How are you going to step up and how are you going to help people get back to a solid footing so they can figure out a way to get some control over their lives?
Right. Yeah. So we've got 2 points here. The one is acknowledge people are going to have a personal and an emotional reaction to it. And that secondly, it's quite possible that you as the leader may have some prior awareness to planned change. So the layoffs are happening, even if it's 1 or 2 days before they're announced, or the acquisition is taking place, even if it's a week before. So to prepare, to go through that change and integrate that for yourself personally before you then are able to think about how do I roll that out or support my people emotionally. Are there other key things we need to be thinking about? Like what have you seen leaders do well? What have you done well when leading a team or an organization through change?
I mean, the best model that I've seen around change management is one I visually have in my head all the time. Status quo, disruption, innovation, like awareness or adoption. Sorry. And then innovation. So status quo, disruption, adoption, meaning that you're accepting it. And then innovation, which is getting better. And I can't get those 4 things out of my head. And even though I've seen 5,000 different models, which all fit nice under those, I can't get them out of my head. And so there's 2 places here. One is you've rolled out the change, so you have knocked people into disruption. What are those questions, tools, space, things you can give to people so that you can help them get to adoption? Often leaders will say, how do I get them to adoption? What can I ask them? What can I give them? It's like everybody needs something different. You may need time. I may need to be able to ask 2 or 3 questions and I'm going to get on with it. So the objective for the leader is to figure out what people need for adoption. And then just recognize that you're not going to get to any kind of innovation until people really accept it. Right. And acceptance looks a bunch of different ways, to your point earlier. It could look like, well, that change isn't affecting me. That's over there in the, finance department or the operations team. And it's like, but it's payroll. So it's probably going to impact you as well. No, not me, not it. So there's that. And then there's the sort of like, I'm just going to wait and see what Dean does. You have a bunch of people going, is Dean doing something different? Like, let me look at Dean because I'm not quite sure. Then you have people who are just like, okay, I'm getting on with it. I've asked my questions. I'm good. So it's recognizing what you see in people and then figuring out what they need, especially if they're top performers. The worst thing you want to have is a top performer who goes quiet on you.
What is that? What do you
quiet
thinking?
And quiet can look, it's not always like less talking. It's sometimes like less action or less something. You notice a change and you have a top performer that goes quiet. you need to be figuring it out because you're just going to lose somebody who's really great. And if you're just sort of on your plan, but not necessarily looking at your people and really understanding how they take things in, you got to get people to adoption. So figuring out what to do that is super important. And then innovation is like when everybody wins. It's when we're doing better than what the change was, right? And that's like super important. That's all we want is to get to that stage.
But you need to, for that change curve, and for those that are just listening, you can't see our very, very animated and excited hand movements here. But, you know, the status quo then plunges us down into disruption. And that line going down is actually productivity. It's productivity and progress and results or whatever. The engagement. So the announcement of change, the very next indicator of this change happening is that things feel and look and are worse because there's some shift required. I think the leader's role here, this is what we're talking about, Allison, is that the leader's role is to acknowledge, number one, that this is inevitable, that there will be a drop in engagement, some questions, some time, effort devoted to helping people understand and tolerate this disruption, but that a good leader minimizes the length of time this requires and minimizes the severity of this, the personal impact and the organizational impact of this change. So that then people get to making that decision. I'd love to talk about that adoption point, the point of decision where people go, oh, okay, I get it now. This is what I'm required to do. Oh, I'm not crazy about it, but yeah. Oh, yes, this makes perfect sense. Oh, I'm on board. Oh, I've already got an idea. Oh, I can work on this. And off they go. And we start to see then the engagement increase, the productivity increase, the whole idea, the whole purpose of this friggin' change in the first place start to almost get back to where we started and then actually push us into that fourth and final phase of innovation where things are even better. But you've really got to hold your nerve as a leader to help people through that phase, because if you quit halfway through, what you've done is you've introduced something as a beautiful, new, wonderful thing, and it's just made things shittier.
Where does the non-adopter show up, though? Where's the one who's opting out, or the one who's like, where is that on that in your opinion?
You mean as an individual?
Yeah, like I'm an individual. I'm not interested in this. I'm out.
Well, I think...
Am I even in adoption, or am I...
I think probably still in disruption, or just you're not even on that curve. But what we would say is we're not seeing you if you're not engaged, and if you're not, and that means asking questions and working with your team and collaborating or applying the new process or reaching out to the new leader or whatever the case may be, then you're actually not doing what we've asked you to do. So whether we call it adoption or not, you're actually just not doing your job. So yeah, you're still in that disruption phase. And then that means as a leader, you've got somebody who is just not playing the game. He's not on board with you. And then, you know, I don't want to talk about performance management because that also makes me want to scream and run with sharp objects, but rather to say, what is required for you as a leader to then say, here's this person, why have they lost their way? Why are they not playing nicely? People aren't assholes on purpose.
But sometimes it's like just if you notice a lag in performance or interest or buy-in or even just getting onto it, and it's been, you know, you have to measure what's the right amount of time, right? But and I want to say, oh, if it's 3 months later, because some people are looking for that. So if it's exactly 90 days, then I can like fire them. No, you know, you have to determine the right amount of time for the change that you're driving. So I always use do you remember when Mike Bloomberg came back? He changed so many things. But remember when we went from number 2 pencils to number 1 pencils? Do you remember that?
I think I do. What, in all the meeting rooms?
Yeah, literally changed out all the pencils. This is not one where you're like, can we give people 30 days to change, to understand? No, this was done. Like, you showed up, you left on a Tuesday, they were number 2, you came back, they were number 1. This was not something that we needed people to accept or adopt or anything. He thought meetings were a waste of time anyway, so he didn't even want that. So why are you in there in the first place? Anyway, I just thought I would tell that story. So my point, my thing where I was going was, I think we have to give people the time that they need, but you have to determine if people have spent another time. And that measurement is very tricky, right? And if they're not, just ask them. I'm noticing that you're not. Like, I feel this indicates to me that you're not bought in, or that you haven't accepted, or and this is what I'm noticing. This is the impact that's happening. How do I help you get bought in? Because you're important to the organization, to the team. You set an example, especially if they're people if they are one of these people that people follow, right? You need to connect with that person, especially if you've done or feel like you've done everything you need to do to get that person on board and they still aren't.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Right.
And I would also, what I want to add to that is and I hear you saying this very clearly, but when we say we need to give people the time they need, this is not a passive, I'm a leader, I've told somebody something, and then I'm going to go off and watch the clock.
No.
It's I will invest the time that this person needs to make sure I'm reminding them again. Are you clear on the change? Have I given you all the information, all the data? Is there anything else you need to find out to learn about this, the facts, the operations, the logistics? Secondly, are you clear on what is required of you? How can I explain it to you again? Who else can you speak to? What other, training program can you go on? Like, it's active. Do you then know why this change is happening as well? Can you articulate this? You may not even be bought in, but tough teddy. That's why you work in corporate America. Sometimes you're like, okay, they've changed this. How do I shift my mind to go, all right, this is the direction of the company. I understand why. I may not have done it. Guess what? I'm not the CEO, but I do understand why. And until those three things have happened as a leader, that's when we're talking about give them the time they need. It's active. It's how do I do this? How do I make sure I've addressed this and given every single person in my group or my team the information they need to talk, to be taught, to be trained up, whatever the case may be. And then they're still not, then we're in a different place.
Yeah.
But rather than that guy, then my team is, no.
No.
You're the leader.
100%.
Yeah. Get with them. Get with them. Love them through it. It's okay. Are there any practical tips or advice other pieces of advice we could give to a leader about dealing with change themselves, or how they talk about change with their team?
Well, I want to tie something back to our point around in our last podcast when we were talking about self-awareness. I think it's really important as a leader to understand your own reaction to change, how you take in change, how you process change. Because recognizing, leaders are the first, like, they're in front. They are in front, being seen, being listened to, having, and people are looking for your reaction. Are they really bought into what they're saying? Are they really on board with it? So I think it's really important to understand your way of dealing with change.
Right.
And, and how you process it. And if you happen to be hearing change at the same time as everyone else, because it's happening to you as well as the team, even more so, you need to be thinking about how you're showing up and how you are being seen in that moment. And so that's hard, especially if you're hearing it at the same time, right? But, if you're able to sort of know about it, process it, get yourself centered before you get in front of your team. Be keenly aware of what you say and do and your reactions. And no one's asking for fakeness. I will never on this podcast ask people to fake it. It used to hurt my feelings so much when we used to ask managers who don't understand our performance management processes to go and do performance management, tell a top performer because of some talent review that we ran that they are no longer a top performer and now they're a middle performer because we need to get all of this to balance out so that we can comp people within a budget. It used to be the most craziest things for me. So I'm not ever going to suggest to people that they fake it. But I do think there is something about being keenly aware of how you understand, how you process change, how you deal with change, and how that may impact people who are watching you. And what you're saying. Does that make sense?
No, I love that. You know, this also reminds me of something that my psychoanalyst said to me a long time ago. She said, whenever you see inertia, so like, bigger pardon, whenever you see velocity, so like this pace, in people's behavior, the unconscious is at work. And if I can sort of apply that then to what this means for leadership, it's actually saying when we feel within us as a leader, this desire to push or to go at a greater pace, it doesn't mean we have to go slowly, but it's a time for us to really lean and go, okay, let me just check. Because when pushing this, announcing this decision, or we've got this change, or I don't want to lose my working hours, or I don't want to lose, our resource or our budget, and it becomes this, that like breathless push, that is where, and by unconscious, we mean sort of those motives and our default behavior that may not be aware to us in the moment. And that's exactly what you're saying. We need to be aware of our own stuff. But for every leader to be able to say, oh, I know that when I'm stressed or when I'm under a time crunch, and especially something like a change where I've just been given this mandate and I need to make sure my entire team are using XYZ process by the 13th of August, my default is detail. My default is running around and making sure people are feeling okay. My default is like, what is it? And it may be in it may show up in a number of spaces, a desire to sort of be introverted and logical and detail and accurate and perfect, or a desire for just speed and just execute. Doesn't matter what the hell, just go, 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 go. Or the people stuff. So know your own stuff. We were talking about in our last podcast about that self-awareness. So I'm glad you've shared this with us as well. But any of these moments are another chance.
But are you saying know what your stuff is, know what your default is? But are you suggesting know it and stay there, or flex?
I think just know it, number one, and then two, then you figure out whether that's going to work or not.
Got it.
Because you might be super, super action oriented and you're so quick and you super amazing at banging together a quick plan. Maybe that's what's needed. Thank goodness for that. But do it with intention.
Yeah.
Or maybe you do need to run around and have one-to-ones with people and ask them how they're feeling and what are they, blah, blah, blah. Do it. But just don't do it with your eyes closed and telling yourself the nonsense story of, oh, well, this is appropriate. Just have a look. So maybe you are flexing. But that breathlessness, that push, as soon as that you see that, you and I have all seen this. I still have very vivid, fairly recent memories of sitting with leaders on a Zoom. You can see their eyes have changed. Something is going on and there's fear behind the eyes, and they're like, well, this is the thing we need to do and we need it. And you're like, there is fear here and there's this velocity I'm feeling and I'm just going to get your default now. And there's a 1 in 10 chance it's going to be the right approach.
Mhm.
That's-
And I think as facilitators, you have an opportunity to sort of try that. As leaders, you don't have a lot of opportunities to try to figure out what the default is and what the person actually needs, right? To kind of change. I was reflecting on when we were rolling out career development at Bloomberg, and we had that big, gigantic slide that said 43, it was either 43 or 48, 43% of all of our exits were top performers who weren't even looking for a job. Such a strong statement, which is, which is very true. We backed up everything at Bloomberg with data.
For sure.
But I remember being in a class where a leader didn't want to, like, came into the room, arms crossed, didn't know why he was there. And we went through that point. And he says, so we're doing all this for the people who report to us. What about me? And I was just like, so this is a change that's being rolled out and everybody's required to take it. And how he's processing it is that this is for everybody else and not him. He's frustrated, right? And it's like, that's a person you can now see. And I remember saying in the class, this is for everyone.
Yeah.
We're talking to you about doing this for your employees, but this is, your managers are going through this. They need to be sitting down talking to you about change. So something like career development for the organization, which the organization is putting tens of thousands of dollars behind, was met with, why do we have to do this? What about me? Da 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 da. And we're like, oh my God, this is like supposed to be good news, and it's not.
Yeah.
So 100%. What is their baseline, and what do they need to get unstuck and move on?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. I have all these stories. I don't remember with lots of details, but they're just ingrained in the brain. A lot of the work that we've done.
I know that
over the years.
That's why we need to talk about them, so we can get the stuff out and see what are the themes that emerge, and
Anything else you think we should cover?
I don't think so. I mean, I think no, unless you've got anything burning. I mean, as you and I well know, we could. I said to you after our last one, it's like you and I could probably, if we were locked in a room and they said, Allison, your children are in danger. You have to talk for 8 hours about this topic with Dean, or else we'd be like, oh, only 8 hours. We could do 8 hours, 8 days, but so there's a lot. We could do 8 days. We could save a lot of children in the process, but
I just want to say no children were harmed in the making of this podcast.
None.
No, there's nothing that sort of comes to mind. I think we talked about it. From a process standpoint, again, people are in status quo, they get disrupted. You need them to adopt and then start innovating. I think we talked about it from a human-centric approach, because you never know what's going on in people's lives. And I think that is like super important to understand. We said before in the layoff podcast, layoffs are big and they impact everyone, right? But again, you still don't know how someone's going to process something. And all you can do is just hope they hear and give them the space to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is something about, again, the self-awareness in the leadership, like being a leader who's self-aware about how you deal with your own change.
Yeah.
The only thing, and maybe we just want to bring it back to it later, is to really think about, are there any other additional sort of emotional components of change? And I think the way we started this podcast with you just being like over it, I think there's so much change coming at you. And so just to keep in mind as leaders, there is managed change that you're going to have all the plans around.
Yeah.
And then there are things that are going to come out from left field that land on your desk.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out a way, especially as a leader, to deal with both.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only thing I would add. Otherwise, I think we covered all the points.
Yeah.
And we can. So if you like this podcast, we would definitely appreciate it if you would like, comment, subscribe. And we definitely want to make sure that, we are addressing your needs. This is Dean and I's fourth podcast, and we are learning on the fly and enjoying it, actually. Yeah. And to Dean's point, we can sit around and talk about these topics for hours. And and by the way, we have, and feel really, really good about it. But we want to make sure that we're giving you what you need in the way that you need. And so please give us the comments. Please give us the feedback. Unlike most HRE terms, we don't believe feedback is a gift. We believe it's something to request and something to hear.
Yeah.
And so we just want to make sure that we're giving you what you need. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Dean, yes. As always, yes. We end with a personal and honest truth about this topic. I'm going to throw it to you first, and then I will give mine.
A personal and honest truth about change is that as a leader, your people are looking to you, and as a leader, be close to them and be with them, and in what you say and also in how you're showing up, give them the confidence to be able to adapt and adopt whatever is required. Mm-hmm. What about you? What's your personal and honest truth about change?
That change is constant. Mm. And if things don't change, things will never change. So they change. You have to just deal with it. Change is there. It's going to happen. And change is both professional and personal. Yeah. And some of the practices that you are adopting at work, you can also work through at home, right? I often use the analogy, we buy these houses in the suburbs because somebody told us that's what you're supposed to do if you grew up in the city. Right. You go buy a house in the suburbs, you choose the house, you walk through the house, you love the house, you pay millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on where you live, for the house. You're excited about it. And then you go to move into the house and do all the planning to get into the house, and you're like really not happy. Like you're frustrated and it was your choice. So yes. some change you're driving, yes. Some change happens to you, some change you didn't foresee. But either way, it's change. But the same rules apply. Something knocks you out of status quo. You're now in disruption. You got to figure out a way to get over it and move on. So you need to adopt. Yeah. And then innovation is where you want to be. And the only other last point I would say, and we didn't talk about it, but it's like sometimes change management knocks folks into disruption and they never get to adoption and they never get to innovation. Right. So they're really just doing a little bit better, but they're not doing as well as they were before they were in status quo. So we've got to get people through the phases and to innovation, because that's where the real greatness comes. Yes. And we should talk about that at some point, that sort of meandering into adoption and disruption and never innovating, because that is a shame. Like if you've rolled out a new product launch, no one's using it, nobody likes it, your own employees don't even talk about it well. You know, all that change happened. And now you're just down here below the line of the status quo. Yeah. You're kind of doing average work and it's just costing you and it's not necessarily helping. So we will talk about that on another podcast, but that's the only thing, personal and honest truth.
Extra.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank you guys so much. We appreciate you. We're building this community. You're a part of it. So we want to hear your voices. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Dean.